All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. I know the holidays are upon us. Everybody's schedule is starting to get busy, so certainly a big thank you for taking the time to come here this morning. I'm Allison Woodard. I am president of the Williamsburg Battlefield Association. If you're not familiar with the WBA, as we call ourselves, let me just take a moment to give you a... Did I just die here? Hello? Okay. Just to give you a little bit of information about our organization. So when you say Williamsburg, the first thing that comes to most people's minds is colonial Williamsburg and the 18th century history of Williamsburg. Most people aren't aware that there was a battle, a Civil War battle at Williamsburg on May 5th, 1862, and following the battle, the town itself was under Union occupation for 3 years. But there are many wonderful and interesting and untold stories about Williamsburg during the Civil War. So that is our mission. We want to research and tell those untold stories of Civil War Williamsburg. Another part of our mission, though, is to assist in the saving and preserving of the Williamsburg battlefield. Now, when we formed 10 years ago, there were only 2 acres of the Williamsburg battlefield preserved. So in the past 10 years, though, over 300 acres of the Williamsburg battlefield has been saved by the American Battlefield Trust. But the trust did not act alone. Jim Lighthizer, President Emeritus of the American Battlefield Trust, once said that land preservation doesn't happen by accident. It happens because locals agitate. And some of you here today helped the Trust and the WBA agitate for those 300 acres. The preservation of the 245-acre Egger tract that was successfully saved in December of 2021 and which encompasses the entire afternoon phase of the battle took 10 years. It was 10 years in the making to save the Egger tract. Preservation is a slow process. It takes time, it takes coordination, networking, partnerships between residents, businesses, municipalities, and a variety of agencies. So why do we agitate to save the Williamsburg battlefield? There are certainly educational benefits to saving battlefields. There is value to our community and to our nation in saving our shared history. And battlefields offer outdoor living classrooms to interpret and for instruction. Many people, though, may not be aware that there are also economic and environmental benefits to preserving battlefields. We're going to save the discussion on the economic benefits for another program at another time. Today, we're going to focus on the environmental benefits of preserving battlefields. Because of its efforts to save battlefields, the American Battlefield Trust is one of the largest conservation organizations in the country and sees a great opportunity to merge preservation of battlefields with ecological work and habitat restoration. For that reason, we have invited here today Tom Sielli from the American Battlefield Trust to speak to us. Tom is the Land Stewardship Manager for the ABT. He oversees more than 200 trust-owned properties, covering over 1,200 acres of conserved land.
12,000.
I'm sorry?
12,000.
12,000. I left a zero off there. His responsibilities include maintaining and restoring historic battlefields, coordinating native habitat restoration, partnership engagement, and ensuring compliance with easements. Tom has been a conservation biologist for 20 years and has experienced managing multi-state projects on both public and private lands. He earned his BS in biology at the University of Colorado and his MS in natural resources from the University of Vermont. Prior to joining the trust, Tom served as regional science coordinator for the American Chestnut Foundation, where he worked with partners and volunteers on chestnut restoration over a multi-state region from Maryland to Alabama. Tom is also a member of the leadership team with Blue Ridge Prism, which is an organization that works to reduce the impact of invasive species on ecosystems. And in an earlier life, Tom served for 10 years as a medic and firefighter with the Nederland Fire Protection District in Colorado. In his free time, which I don't know how you have any,
I don't.
he volunteers with the Virginia Master Naturalists and seeks any opportunity to manage invasive species and restore native habitats in Virginia and beyond. Following his program, Tom will take some time for questions. Please raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you so you can ask the question, because we are having this recorded and videoed. Afterwards, I will make a few closing remarks. So with that, please welcome Tom Scieli.
Thank you. Thank you all. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I too loud? No, okay. All right. Well, great segue to talk about what I want to talk about today, which is stewardship. So obviously, as you just heard, the American Battlefield Trust is one of the largest land conservation organizations in the United States. Second to the Nature Conservancy, and then there's a lot of state organizations that do a lot of conservation work, and then a lot of other nonprofits. But among us, there's a lot of efforts to conserve land. Now, over the years that I've been a conservation biologist, I've worked with a lot of those conservation organizations. And one thing that some of us in the conservation biology field notice is that land conservation is really valuable because it keeps land from being developed. And right there, one of the biggest impacts on our natural places is development. When we lose our forests because a Walmart is put in, or a data center, or even a highway, or anything like that, we lose that forever. When we put land into conservation, either by buying it, like we do, or by having an easement on it, we don't destroy that, or not destroy it. We need our businesses, we need our highways, we even need data centers. But if we can put land into conservation, we can at least assure that some land is being protected. By protecting lands, we're ensuring habitat for wildlife. We're ensuring some amount of clean water, clean air, carbon sequestration. And we're ensuring that these natural places will exist for people to enjoy for decades and centuries to come. One of the things that we noticed throughout the years that we've been doing work, especially working with landowners who put their land into an easement, is that there are no mandates for doing environmental work. There's no rule that you have to manage the invasive species on your land, or that you have to have an adequate riparian buffer. Do you guys know what a riparian buffer is? Yeah, it's the area around creeks, streams, and wetlands, that's the forest that help protect that land so that there's not erosion, and so that you don't end up with a lot of sediment and nutrients entering the watershed and getting into the Chesapeake Bay, right? So we want to make sure that there's a good buffer around all those water systems, right? That's not required when land is in conservation. And none of the conservation organizations require that. They all promote it. And if a landowner wants to do that work, they can, but typically they're on their own. When I started working for the trust wasn't doing a lot of this environmental work because, like any other conservation organization, the real goal was to conserve land. We're unique in some ways because we conserve land that was a part of a historic battlefield. But we didn't have a mandate to do any sort of environmental work. Well, when they hired me, they hired a conservation biologist, and right away I set a course for changing the way land conservation organizations do their work. We'll conserve land. We'll do all the old stewardship things that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about all this in a second, but what we're also going to do is we're going to restore habitat. We're going to ensure that there's adequate riparian buffers. We're going to try to restore bird and pollinator habitat. First, let me just reiterate a little thing about the American Battlefield Trust. As an organization that is trying to conserve land, we have a particular goal of conserving land that was related to old historic battlefields. We do this in two ways, through fee simple transactions and through easements. Mostly, we try to buy the land. That's our preferred method. We buy it, and then we transfer it to a park. But one way or another, we try to get land into conservation. We do this by identifying the right sites to conserve. Now again, I had mentioned that other conservation organizations have a way of doing this. What most conservation organizations are looking for is large tracts of land that would be in certain locations where they would provide those environmental benefits, the forested areas. Some groups only conserve forested areas. Some groups will conserve any type of open land, but they want land that hasn't been developed yet. And then they put it into a conservation easement, and they either prohibit or limit development on that land. We're different. The American Battlefield Trust tries to find old historic battlefields. That's Civil War, Revolutionary War, and War of 1812. But other battles, too. There are some places where there was an incident with Native Americans. We're interested in those. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunities to conserve lands where we can see that there was something historic happened there, and those are hallowed grounds. But mostly it's those three battles, mostly Civil War. And so we use the ABPP landmark studies, which went around the country and identified sites that would be considered noteworthy battles. They identified 13,000 battles and skirmishes in the United States, again, mostly Civil War. 627 of those sites we consider worthy, meaning there was a big enough battle. It was significant in the course of the war. Enough people died there. It's kind of morose and strangely interesting to us, these battlefields. I'm fascinated by them. Before I worked for the Trust, I would go to a lot of our historic battlefield parks and explore them with some strange interest in what happened there. Maybe because it was so long ago, it's now interesting, but I still find it horrifying. And I'm sure everybody goes out there and has this sort of like just subdued sense of what actually happened here, right? So those are the sites that we're most interested in conserving. Once we identify sites, we watch those properties. Usually somebody else owns them, some property owner, it's a farm, it's a subdivision, it's a motel, whatever it is, we want to try to get those lands. So as they go up for sale, we're watching them, and we try to come in and buy them. A lot of times we'll approach landowners and ask them if they want to put their land into an easement. And a lot of times they say yes, and sometimes they say no. But ultimately, we buy it piece by piece by piece, often buying small parcels that have been developed, sometimes buying large tracts of land that have been undeveloped. I prefer when we buy large tracts of land that have been undeveloped. But unfortunately, I mostly end up with small parcels with structures all over them. So here's a little snapshot of lands that we have conserved in the United States. Now, I will point out one thing about this. When I first saw this map, I thought each of these dots, the number on it represented the number of parcels that went into that battle. That's not what it is. That's not what those numbers mean. If you look at that map, there's going to be a list next to it, and each one of those battlefields corresponds with a number. But what these represent are the battles where we saved land. So in some of these cases, we may have had to buy dozens of parcels that we piecemeal together to create a battlefield park. That is a lot of parks that we have been able to put into conservation over the years. I put another little map here. This is just one snapshot of Virginia. It's got, you can see where we are in Williamsburg, the little bit of land that we have there that we're so proud of. And then you can see how much land we have in Richmond and Petersburg. You know, you can see that those are piecemeal plots all put together, right? And you can see like these are different battles that took place over time, and we buy all these lands. And you can see how much work is going on just around Richmond, you know, when you've got the Cold Harbor events, and you've got the Webb's 2 battle, and you've got the White Oak Road battle, and you've got all these different battles that took place over the few years. They're all Civil War battles, but they happened at different times, and so we're buying all this land from these different battles, and we put them all together until we get enough land that you can turn it into a park, right? And so that's what I'm out there all the time. I'm looking at these parcels and I'm figuring out what to do with them and how to piece them together and how to make a park out of them. You've got a great park right there. This one right here. The Egger Tract. We went and looked at that yesterday. The first time I saw it, it's amazing. The readout there is one of the most intact ones I've ever seen. And it's great. And it's also a big, beautiful piece of land. It's how many acres? 245 acres if you look at just the area that's surrounded. You know why the MLR acres is different than the GIS acres? The smaller the parcel and the flatter the land, the more those numbers are going to be the same. The bigger the parcel and the more you've got topographical constraints, the more those numbers will be different, because the actual square footage of the land changes when you add hills. Then we went and looked at this one too. A couple of interesting sites right here in Williamsburg, and we already started coming up with some good ideas for what we can do there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is what I do. I travel on the country, I look at sites, and I figure out what can we do with these different properties. What can we do when we've got a piece of land and we either have a big open field to work with, or maybe we buy a piece of land like the Egger Track and it's all wooded. You know, what can we do with that? Unfortunately, as I'd mentioned, mostly we get small lots like this. This is one of our sites in Gettysburg. This place is a long way from becoming part of the rest of the Gettysburg Military Park, because I've got structures on it, and I've got a paved driveway on it, and we've got septic systems and wells, and it's attached to a business that's back in the background, right? We can't exactly have tourists come and check this out. First of all, it's not interesting. Second of all, I've got tenants in there. So sooner or later, I'm going to have to do something with that. Typically, what I have to do is figure out how to get it from that to this. In time, all the land gets transferred to a park. I have to get it ready for that. Almost in every case, eventually I have to take down all the structures. I have to restore the land. Sometimes I put in the trails and the interpretive signs, but we have to make it a park when we turn it over to the state or the National Park Service. This was just in last June. Many of you may have heard about the transfer of all the lands in Culpeper to the Virginia State Park System. These are all going to be part of the Virginia State Parks. I've been working my butt off in Culpeper to try to get these lands ready. In order for us to do this, I have to make sure that we meet all the requirements, that we've taken down structures, everything I just talked about, right? But before we can do it, I have to figure out what to do with things like this. When I inherit properties, the first thing I do is I say, how long is it going to be between now and the time that this gets turned over to the state or national park? Because if I have structures like these houses on it, and it could be years, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. The process of turning these lands over to the park is a long process. Do you know why we have to turn them over to the park? Well, because they're equipped for the long-term visitor experience type of a thing, right? They can hold on to it, they can maintain it. We only have so much resources to buy land. Now, what we have that the Park Service doesn't have is the ability to jump on land as soon as it goes up for sale. We don't have all the red tape that state and federal governments have when it comes to buying land. So when these properties become available, you have to act quick because the developers are trying to get them too. And so we have the ability to swoop in there, buy that land, and then over the next 10 or 20 years, the Park Service can try to come up with the resources to then buy it from us. But we have to keep that process going where we're buying up all the land to preserve it, and we transfer it to the parks to put it into a long-term park system. But if I own a piece of property like this for 10 or 20 years, I'm going to put tenants in them. So now I'm a property manager. And I usually have to fix them up. This picture here on the right, I have tenants in. It's a pretty easy place. It was in good shape when we got it, so we immediately moved some people in. We're collecting rent. Periodically I have to fix things, but otherwise I keep it in rent. This property on the left needs a ton of work. I took this picture about 2 months ago. Since then, pool's gone, underground oil tank has been ripped out, all the paulownia trees that are hanging over the house that were dangerous, they're gone. The sidewalk's gone, the fence is gone. Over the course of the next 5 to 6 weeks, my contractors are remodeling that house. They're ripping out all the old mildewy carpeting and all the old panel boards from the 70s and the fluorescent lights, all that stuff. We're restoring this place and we're going to make it beautiful and then we're going to rent it out. So a lot of times renting out a house is the best option. If this house was in any worse shape than it is, I'd board it up and mothball it. I hate having vacant houses because people break into them and they vandalize them and they go on the property and they dump their trash and I don't even want to know what they're doing inside those buildings, right? So I got to board them up, and I just can't wait to tear them down. Whoops. When I own a property and I have tenants, that's no joy either, because now I have to deal with bad roofs and shaky construction and all sorts of other things that are going wrong with them, like trees falling down. We were joking yesterday about the trees falling down, and this was one of our properties. I think this is one of our Williamsburg. This is also in Williamsburg. It's on the back side of one of our properties, and we own the open space and the road, but we don't own the houses. So the tree just happens to be on our side of that fence, but when it fell down, it landed right over their chicken coop. So guess who has to go up and try to pull that tree down without killing the chickens and getting sued and buck that tree up? So that's me and one of my guys that works for me, Dave Shockley, and we had to go up there and pull that tree down. A lot of times I'll get contractors to go do that work, but there's so much work to be done. We can't always afford that, because we have a limited budget. So it's a lot of work to maintain these properties. So the other conservation organizations, they buy forests, and we buy lots with houses on them, so we usually have to do this work. A lot of times, I get to just demolish them. This is famous Slaughter Pen Farm in Fredericksburg. This is a famous battle, and this house has stood there for a long time, but it's not a historic house. It's a modern house. I mean, it doesn't seem modern anymore because it's 100 years old and it was haunted, but it was still considered. It was. I had to go in there once, and I heard voices. I left. So what I'll do in this case is I tear them down. This is great. When I have property that has homes on it, I tear them down. This one and 7 adjacent properties. No, 6 adjacent properties, 7 in total. I took down the houses, the barns, the garages, the concrete pads, the utility poles, the septic systems, everything. And now I have these open fields that we're going to turn into bird and pollinator habitat. And then we'll have some trails and some signage and make it a visitor use experience, drawing in not just Civil War buffs, but people who want to go bird watching and come and explore this beautiful place. It will be beautiful. It'll take years to get there. But tearing down these houses, man, I don't have to worry about people starting a meth lab in this house anymore. The ghosts are still there. Here it is afterward. This was great. So look at that blank slate. Still a lot of invasive weeds, all those autumn olive back there. We still got to get rid of all that stuff, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Sometimes I don't tear them down or rent them out. Sometimes we have historic structures. In this case, see this part? That old stone section of the house was Civil War era. Everything else was built after the Civil War. This was a massive hotel at one point. And on both sides of the road were all these hotel buildings and parking lots and everything. It was this huge modern structure. But in the middle were these 2 homes that were critical places during the Battle of Gettysburg. And one of them was General Lee's headquarters, and the other one was a place where they say they had it as a field hospital, but I think every single house in Gettysburg was a field hospital during the Civil War. So it's probably true that it was a field hospital, but that wasn't unique to the homes in this area. But here's the thing. When we want to do some restoration work, we have to hire architects who come out. And they study the area, and they do radar and the ground, and they study the home. And they were able to figure out exactly what the home was and what it looked like beforehand. And they give us these drawings, and they give us blueprints, and they produce all these reports. And with that, we can start the work on these homes. And here's the one across the street. You remember that little stone building? Both of these houses were originally just little stone buildings. Here we are restoring that place. If I can't tear a house down, I want to do this. This is a beautiful place, and here it is now. That's what we want to do with historic places. And then we work on the environment, we put in the trails, the interpretive signs, and this place generates so much tourism. We get like hundreds of visitors a week coming through this place now. But beyond conserving the land and restoring the old homesteads, there's a part of me that wants to see the restoration work. This is a property I was at. I took this picture 1 week ago. This was a property in Manassas. And you can see the old structure that I still have to take down. This place has a couple of old structures like that. It's got this another haunted building that people just, for some reason, they just want to break into these buildings. And I'm like, why? It's so gross in there. Why are you breaking in? So I had to board it up and lock it. But while I'm waiting for the green light to tear down the structures, we're managing the invasive grasses. We're putting in pollinator habitat. We're planting trees. Here I am out with my volunteers last week, planting trees. Last week, we planted 100 oaks, 3 different species of oaks. When the nursery lifts the rest of our trees, we will plant hickories, maples, sycamores. We're going to plant all these trees, and as we take down the structures, we'll fill that in as well. And we're going to create a beautiful habitat. We're going to put the forest. This will become compatible with the existing forest system that's there, but it will have a parking area with a little trail, and it'll have some bird habitat and a place for pollinators. And we're going to turn this into a beautiful place because this is an opportunity for us to do more than just conserve the land, but to do something good with it. And that's my goal, healthy forests, riparian buffers, and wetlands, right? Bird and pollinator habitat, which is, I think, a little bit overlooked when we think about conserving land, especially when we have forests, right? We think we've got to conserve these forests. We do have to conserve the forests. But Virginia is 80% forest. We need to conserve that, and we need to do work on it because we're seeing some transitions in the structure of the forest, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. But what we really need is to conserve and restore bird and pollinator habitat because those are those big open fields those birds need to nest in. And it's all being turned into farmland, or it's being developed, or it's being turned back into forest. The Egger Tract used to be an open space. It used to be a wheat field, but now it's a forest. What we need are more open fields for birds. Most of the open fields that are in grass gets hayed. And guess what? When they go and they do that first cut in the spring, they run right over the birds. There's nesting birds in there, and they run right over them and kill them. Best time to collect hay? Not according to science. You can wait and cut in July. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But also managing invasives. Everything else on this list doesn't work if we don't manage invasive species. And I can go into the invasive species thing a little bit more if we have time, but let's just put it on the table. All these ecosystems, especially the riparian buffers and wetlands and forest edges, are being invaded by invasive plants, and they're a problem, and we could talk about why, but let's just put it on the table that we need to manage those, and if we do, the native ecosystems will tend to do well on their own. That's the first thing we have to do. Starting since I began working for the American Battlefield Trust, we have made a concerted effort to start making restoring critical wildlife habitat one of our goals. This last year alone, we've had more than 250 volunteers come out to our events. We've had 9 different events. We had the military. We had all these Army cadets come out. Is anybody here old Army? Like anybody here from the Army? Well, don't listen to this part. They were the worst helpers I've ever had. They were almost as bad as the high school kids that come out and help us. But they were really young, and they were so gung-ho, and they were and they went out there, and they didn't listen to any of the instructions, and they just went out there and started whacking down everything left and right, and they weren't going after the invasives, and they broke my tools. But we got a lot done that day because I had 250 or something, well, maybe not that many, but I had a lot of cadets out there. And they weren't great helpers, but they got a lot done. And then, so the other thing is not just working with volunteers, but is collaborating with other groups. Whenever we have a volunteer event, I try to invite other groups, other agency partners, other nonprofits. It's always those friends groups that show up, master naturalists, master gardeners. I get so many great groups of people who are there because they really want to do the work. They really care. And part of it is I care about this ecosystem and I want to learn how to maintain it. And part of it is we can train landowners how to do this work. We can train landowners how to manage invasive species safely and effectively, and they can go back and do the same work on their property. And they're not stuck at Lowe's looking at a shelf of herbicides, not knowing which one they can use and probably using the wrong one incorrectly and doing something unsafe. We can teach people how to do this work correctly, and that's something that I do every time I have an event. And in my free time, that I have none of, I do like to go out with volunteers, and we do work in other places, even when I'm not on the clock, because this matters. Here's a snapshot of that Cedar Mountain battlefield again. I'm working with NRCS and Virginia Grasslands Initiative to get the funding and the expert people together to do a big restoration project here before we turn it over to the state, or as we turn it over to the state. And what we're doing at this site is we're identifying the different types of ecosystems. We've got the forested ecosystems, the whole area. This is just one small piece, part of the bigger Culpeper battlefield. We have thousands of acres up there. This one, we have 292 acres. That's a lot of forest. That's a lot of grassland that's in hay. Some riparian areas, right? And so what we do is we identify everything that's there. We've gone through, we've identified the plants that we have, and we're going to figure out what to do with it. When we have forested areas, we want to work with our agency partners, mostly the state foresters, and we want to go in there and we want to take an inventory of what's there, and then we want to manage it. Oftentimes there's invasive species. Those are the first things we want to try to take care of, right? We also want to manage the understory, right? Now, why would we have to manage the understory? Because we're seeing the composition of our forests changing over time, mostly due to excessive deer pressure and lack of fire. Deer pressure and lack of fire has our forest going from, in Virginia, a lot of our dominant forest types are oak hickory types or oak hickory chestnut, and chestnuts are now gone mostly, but not completely gone, right? We're bringing them back. But those forest types are transitioning to something with a lot more fast-growing species like tulip poplars and maples and black gum, and a lot of those species which, you know, from the forester's perspective, they don't make good timber, but from the perspective of a healthy forest, they're not good either because they don't match up with the historical range of variability. And what that means is we've seen our forests change in the last 100 years. That's not good for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons for getting it back to the way it was before all these transitions started to happen was those forests were more like the oak hickory chestnut forest back during the Civil War. We can get them back to that again, right? There's a plug, right? We want to try to make these places more historic preservation, but also a healthier forest is going to be better for wildlife, and even more importantly, it's going to be better for carbon sequestration. If we can manage the understory and the midstory and do some thinning appropriately, the forest that we can have coming in instead will sequester more carbon. This is the basis of the American Family Forest Foundation's Forest Carbon Plan, where family foresters, people with family forests that are big enough, they can enroll in this program with American Family Forests. And you get into this program, they will help you do the same management that we're talking about doing, where you manage your understory, you encourage more oaks, more species that are going to live longer and grow slower, that are going to make it easier for that forest to sequester more carbon, right? And so that's one of the goals. Now, this is a picture that I took in the Blue Ridge Mountains. This isn't from Cedar Mountain, but notice the bags on the tree in the foreground, and actually the tree in the background. These are wild American chestnuts. And we were able to find them. We put bags on the flowers, and we pollinated those trees, and we incorporated them into the hybrid breeding program. One of my plugs for anybody who wants to see their forest get healthy is if it's an appropriate place for American chestnut, we could start reintroducing chestnuts. And some of our properties, we're going to be doing that. We're certainly going to do it at Cedar Mountain. So kind of a cool thing. Here we are at Cedar Mountain doing what we have to do most and foremost on any forest management plan. We are having a volunteer event to manage invasive species. These are just a couple of my volunteers working on the edge. The edges are always the hardest hit places. They're working on privet and honeysuckle vines and multiflora rose. I hate multiflora rose. You guys know multiflora rose? It's the one with those sharp cat claws, and when you walk by it, it grabs you and it goes meow and tries to tear your flesh. I hate them. And this guy on the right here, that's Tim Maywalt. He's on the leadership team at Blue Ridge Prism. He's an invasive plant expert, and he usually comes out to our events and helps co-manage the event. He's one of my crew leaders, so he'll take a small group and go out and show them how to do it. And so we got to do that. More importantly is managing the invasives in the wetland areas. Wetlands and riparian buffers. This is a place that I think is really crucial, A, to make sure that clean water is going into the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and B, these are critical places for wildlife. And C, they're some of the hardest hit places. Oftentimes they take wetlands and they turn them into these retention ponds. A lot of times when we don't control the runoff over the landscape, the little streams become rutted and deep and turn into ditches. And then, of course, the riparian buffers themselves are usually not adequate, right? They're supposed to be at least 35 feet, preferably 60 feet buffer around either side, and we're lucky if we've got 10 or 20 feet or anything at all on our streams and ponds. Now, what was I going to say about that? Anyway, we want to manage the invasive species, and then we want to replant. We want to get trees and bushes in there. Again, things that benefit birds and pollinators and other wildlife. We work with the engineers to look at these streams and see how we can stop them from washing out, and what we can do, putting in breaks and so forth. Eventually, we want to take down some of these retention ponds and restore the wetlands to the area. Now, a wetland during flooding events is going to be much better prepared to absorb that water. When you have a wetland with trees and lots of vegetation, that water has a place to go, and it doesn't rush over the land and carry all that sediment and nutrients into the Chesapeake Bay. All right? So this is something that's really important to us. And just something that came up, and maybe you guys were going to ask this question, but something came up in a recent, I was giving a presentation to our board members, and somebody said, well, what if there wasn't a riparian buffer during the Civil War? And I said, well, then we're going to have to put up a sign that says there wasn't a riparian buffer here during the Civil War. Because, well, if there was an open field during the Civil War, we'll make it an open field now. And if it was a forest during the Civil War, we'll make it a forest now. And you see us doing both of those things. But if there's a wetland here, we're restoring the wetland, and we have to put in the buffer. Because we would not be good stewards if we didn't do that, and we just let all that pollution go to the Chesapeake Bay. So if it wasn't like that during the Civil War, we have to do it now. It's kind of critical. And what we can do is put up signs. I'm joking, but I'm also serious. We can put up signs and show people, this is what it looked like, this is the way it is now, and here's why. And here's the ecological message. We're going to send an ecological message with all the work that we're doing. When people are coming out there to see birds, they're going to see the signs that talk about how we restored the bird habitat, how we restored the wetlands. We expect that to be a big draw for tourism. I have loved to work with my agency partners. Here we are doing wetland restoration, and we of course have people from the state out there helping us, people from NRCS, PEC, all these different environmental groups. They come out. We can't do this alone. We need the help because I don't know what I'm doing, and I need people like her to tell me what to do. This is that same wetland area covered in stiltgrass. One of our biggest problems, right? The stiltgrass. You guys know stiltgrass? If it's a solid mat of green in your forest, it's stiltgrass. That stuff is tenacious. You know how it got here? They used to use it for packing material when they send us fragile stuff from China. And they take the stiltgrass because it's soft and pack it up in that. Now it's everywhere. Some people say it's not worth fighting because it's so tenacious, it's hard to get rid of. Actually, I don't think it's that hard to get rid of. We just do that. We mow it down. It's one of those things that you don't even really have to use herbicide. You can, safely, but anytime I cannot use herbicide, if I can get away with it, I try not to. When you have big carpets of stiltgrass, if you mow it down in late summer, now don't mow it multiple times during the year, just wait until late summer, early fall before it goes to seed. If you stop it from going to seed, you'll get rid of it. It's an annual. Every year it comes back from the seed bank. Stop the seeds from getting in the seed bank, and you can actually control this. It's not even that hard. You just have to kill it before it goes to seed. You can hand pull it or spray it with herbicide. Only certain herbicides. We should talk about herbicides later. I don't know if I'm going to have time to talk about it today, but not every herbicide is safe to use, but some can be used safely. It's important to know the difference. Here's the thing that I've been focused mostly on, bird and pollinator habitat. These are the ecosystems that are most in peril. Bird and pollinator habitat is on the decline. I had already mentioned this earlier. It's either being farmed, or it's developed, or it's being turned back into forest. And the ground nesting birds that need these big open grasslands are on the serious decline. If we want to protect our bird species, quail and kestrels and all the things that require large open fields, then we must have enough bird habitat. What I like to do is work with agency partners and nonprofits to come up with plans and funding to work with our hay farmers, or agriculture farmers that can be convinced to become hay farmers. Why hay farming? If hay farmers are going to go out there and cut when the birds are nesting and kill all the birds, that doesn't work. Well, we want to work on a delayed spring haying cycle, and we're trying to convince our farmers either through financial incentives or by taking over control of the land and then just paying them off. But one way or the other, if they can do a delayed cut, we can wait till the birds fledge before we cut it, so we can keep it in hay. That's important to us, because maintaining these fields is kind of expensive, and if I can get somebody to do it for me, then it's less expensive. But how about if I do this? If I improve the quality of the hay and make it so that they can get better quality hay in July than they're getting right now in June. And if you take a look at that picture, that hay isn't bad, but it's not great. We could make it better through a combination of using very precise fertilization and herbicide to control some of those woody things like the sumacs and the dogbanes, which are really bad for hay. We can make the hay actually really high quality. And then we cut it in July and again in September and sell that. It'll have more nutritional quality. It'll be better quality hay. They'll actually get more hay out of it by waiting and delaying it for another month because it'll grow a little bit more, and we saved our birds. We can't do that with every place because sometimes we need some of those broadleaf wildflowers to come in if we want quail habitat, and we do. And so we're going to be kind of mixing it up and doing different things. But if we mix it up and use different approaches, we can restore a lot of bird habitat. A lot of the fields, we're just going to flat out make pollinator habitat, and sorry, no more hay. We're just going to make it pollinator habitat. Those are smaller areas that we have all over, having migration corridors for pollinators as we go across the landscape. This is a group. Here's one of our sites. We've been working on this site. We've been doing delayed harvesting. This is in Orange County. And I don't know if you can tell, but that's a field of grasses, and that's all milkweed. And it's just this beautiful site, and there's so many bees and pollinators in that field. I'll show you. Look at that. Look at that tiger swallowtail visiting that milkweed. The field was full of these tiger swallowtails, monarchs, all sorts of butterflies. Quail flew out of that field while we were hiking it, right? This is what we're doing this for. This is what we're trying to do more than anything. We own so much open territory. If we can take those open fields and even get a fraction of them to look like this, we're doing something really valuable for the environment. We just have to work with our partners, mainly the farmers, and we have to come up with the money to do it. So we're applying for grants and we're reaching out to our donors. But if we can do it, we can make a real difference. This is typically where I would stop and take questions. But if we answer questions long enough, or if you guys want to know more about the invasive species stuff, I can talk a little bit more about how we control invasive species and why is it so important. But first, why don't we take some questions about everything that I just talked about? Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. Oh, wait for that microphone. I could also repeat the question if it's easier, and then you'll catch it on tape.
Hi, I've been a member of ABT now for about 20 years or so, and this is very educational because I really didn't know that the organization was really renters for in some certain cases. But my question is, the preservation of battlefields and the ecological issues, which one takes priority? When you come up to a battlefield that was, let's say, like a wheat field at one time.
Yeah.
But now, because of ecological issues, you can't make it into a wheat field. It sounds like at this point, you're really, what takes priority?
Yeah. So that's a good question. What do we do with landscapes when we have a conflict between the ecological priorities and historical preservation priorities? First, we have to weigh all the different variables and think about what can we even do with this site. Like, for instance, if I'm turning it over to the national park in the next year or two, maybe I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to turn it over to the park, because any of the work that we're doing usually takes more than a few years to really get something accomplished.
Do you recommend something to the Park Service?
I work with the Park Service. Everybody I work with at the Park Service is on board with this. So oftentimes we will initiate some work And then when we turn it over, the work is at least started, and then they'll pick it up. So for instance, in Gettysburg, we have a bunch of sites that we're turning into bird habitat right now, and the Park Service is turning the adjacent land into bird habitat. So when they inherit this land, they'll just keep the whole thing going.
But that wasn't what the property looked at the battle, right? You were
Well,
changing it, right?
well, so here's how I'll describe what I'm doing. If it was an open field, it might have been farmed.
Right.
In many cases, we keep it in farming. If it's being farmed right now, we'll often keep it in farming. But I would say a field that is in native grasses and wildflowers is just as good as a field that was being farmed. If it was open field during the Civil War, maybe it was being farmed, or maybe it was a hay field, or maybe it was being grazed, and now it's a forest. That's a little bit of a different thing, right? Or if it was a forest, and now it's a golf course. And I'm actually working with a situation like that. We just bought a golf course. It used to be a big open field. And it had a riparian area that was wooded. I want to put it back into a big open field with wooded fields. So we're going to tear out the golf course, right? Or if it was a wooded area and they developed it. Once we tear everything out, you can see we're planting trees. We're putting it back into forest, right? Let's take an example of the Egger Tract. We were talking about this yesterday. Right here in Williamsburg, the Egger Tract. It's wooded now. It's a very young, it's a young forest. You can see that it had been harvested a couple times, and based on the amount of loblolly pine, our guess is that somebody at one point put in a loblolly plantation, harvested it, maybe a couple times, maybe a couple rotations, eventually left it, and then other forest has moved in, and now you have maybe a 40, 50-year-old forest that's a mix of hardwoods and loblolly pine. Well, during the battle, most of that was in wheat field, or at least a lot of it was, right? Well, I'm not inclined to cut down forests if I don't have to, because I love our forests and I think they're valuable. I might work to make them healthy, and we'll talk in a minute about maybe doing a volunteer event or multiple volunteer events in this area and going out to the Egger Tract and doing a little invasive species management, a little forest health work, right? Let's do that. But how about if we do open some of that back up where we had wheat fields? A, we can sell that timber. That might offset the cost of doing the rest of the work that we want to do. B, the area where we took out the timber, we can burn it and then restore it with native grasses and wildflowers. Now, during the battle, it was a wheat field. Now, it's bird habitat. Still, open fields. We've got some forests. We've got some open fields. We're closer to looking like what this land looked like during the Civil War, so we're honoring that historical preservation as much as we can, but we're still being good stewards to the land. Doesn't mean we don't have lots of land that's in hay fields that was probably in agriculture back during the battle. But if I'm taking out a forest and I'm putting something there, I'm going to put in bird habitat. You think that answered? Did that answer?
Yeah, like I said, you kind of open up a new realm for what I understood. I just thought we just bought land, and then as soon as we bought it, we just gave it to the whatever, National Park Service or
right.
organizations, but there's much more to it. Now,
Yeah.
I just want to ask one other question.
Yeah. I'll just repeat it.
You mentioned you're buying all this property. Do you end up paying property tax on this stuff?
Ah, great question. So the question is, do we have to pay property taxes on all of these properties? Usually not, because we're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're tax exempt from most taxes. We do have to pay property. Now, not everybody honors that, and we do in many cases have to pay property taxes. And so one of our ways around that, not that we're trying to get out of paying our taxes, but one of our ways around that is we would put it in agriculture, or hay, or forest it, or do this environmental restoration work. And some of the work that we're doing, creating bird and pollinator habitat, allows us to get tax breaks. So most of the work we're doing on our land gets us tax breaks. The ones where we keep it in housing and rent it out, a lot of times we have to pay taxes on those. Any other questions?
Tom, Allison, thank you so much for being here for us. This question is probably to the both of you and amplifies what you'd mentioned, Tom. My question is, when are the next local events for managing invasives? Some of us have very large Falco bypass loppers, and we're done with our own land, and we're ready to help out.
Yes. All right. We haven't set a specific date yet. The idea of doing some volunteer events around here came up yesterday when we were walking through the Edgar Woods. But let's do it. Let's have a volunteer event. Winter is a great time to manage invasive species. Not only are there effective ways to do it in the winter time, and I have a couple of favorites, but it's not as hot or sticky or buggy or copperhead snaky. And so, I love doing work in the fall. It's more comfortable. I would suggest that we plan a winter event and go out and start doing some vine maintenance. Vines are a great opportunity for learning how to do cut stump methods, and I would bring the equipment. And it's a method that works on things other than vines, small bushes, anything that's small where you can cut the stem, and then you dab the freshly cut stem with we have a little dauber bottle. It's got herbicide in it. I only use the herbicides that are safe for the environment and safe for people. I don't use the dangerous stuff. But I always provide fact sheets, training, PPE, eye wash, all the equipment you need, train you how to do it, and if you do a good job, I'll often let you take the dauber home with you if you promise to use it and keep it with you whenever you go hiking with a hand clipper. When you're hiking in the woods and you see those vines, just look around, you cut that vine and dab it, and then keep walking. But I didn't give you permission to do that.
Well, I'm just so glad I came today because I had thought of the American Battlefield Trust as primarily or even exclusively history-oriented. And I had no idea that you were invested in this ecological restoration work, which is my main interest. And one of my questions, I've got several questions about
Okay. Well, let me just do a quick nod to that because I want to repeat it because because we're not getting you. And I'm just going to say thank you so much. The idea that the American Battlefield Trust is mostly devoted to history as a historical preservation organization, that is the mission. That is the number one mission, and it's always been the mission. This approach to doing environmental work is a little bit new for the trust and for the other organizations. Always, of course, are thinking about the environment, but typically not going this extra step. And when I met the folks at the American Battlefield Trust, when they were looking for a new land steward, the stewardship position didn't do this work. It was managing the properties, it was demolishing buildings, it was working with farmers, and it was trying to get all the land into agriculture, getting it into corn or wheat, right? I came to the trust with some new ideas, and I think the American Battlefield Trust, they weren't coerced into doing this. They embraced it wholeheartedly. And as soon as I got on board, they were like, let's get to work out this environmental work. We want to tell this story. We want to get out there and let everybody know what we're doing. And I meet with other groups from other land conservation organizations. I'm on the steering committee of the Virginia Land Trust Alliance. And this idea seems like it's really like everybody else is already thinking of this, right? This isn't novel. And so we're all trying to figure out, how do we implement this? How do we do this? How do we work with landowners who have easements, And so it's really exciting to sort of see, the future of land conservation is going to be this. What were your questions? I'm sorry.
Well, are you always in agreement? If I understood correctly, you feel your role in land acquisition is as an intermediary because your ultimate goal is to pass the land along to a state or a federal park system? Do I understand that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Our role. Yeah. Yes.
And are you invariably in agreement about the state or federal systems in terms of ecological management? I mean, the reason I'm asking that is a friend of mine who's a master naturalist did a meadowlark study at the battlefield right here.
Yeah.
and really had an uphill battle trying to convince the NPS not to mow at certain times of the year.
Right.
I think she's had limited success in that.
Yeah.
So is it a matter of education of these two, your system and bringing the national park system and the state park systems in sync with what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So just to repeat it, if we're turning all this land over to a park service, how do we make sure, do we assure that they're on board with it? And how do we make sure that they're going to follow our prescription going forward? If they're not always on board, and in case in point, you know somebody who was trying to convince the Park Service to change their mowing schedule to benefit bird habitat, I assume, right? And so the first thing is whichever park we're going to eventually turn the land over to, I collaborate with them up front. When I see an opportunity to do work, I will reach out to whoever the group is that's going to own that land and manage that land in the long term, and I work with them to do this work. So that it's not, I'm doing all this work, and as soon as they take over, they're like, oh, we didn't want you to do that, right? We make sure that they approve it. Then the second thing is, I want to try to get this work done before we turn it over so that that template exists. I don't want them to take over land where it always gets mowed in the spring, and then we're asking them to change some routine, because it's harder to get them to change their routine after they get the land. Which is why if we have land that's in bird habitat and we turn this land over to them and we say, this is bird habitat, here's how you manage it. You know, they've been working with us, they know mow at this time of year. Then we feel more confident that they'll be able to maintain it correctly, hopefully. That may not be true in all cases. We might do a bunch of work and work with their biologists, and then they hire somebody to manage the park who has no interest in that, and they think it's untidy, right? A lot of people don't like our bird habitat, a lot of neighbors. And we have to try to do a lot of outreach then and try to explain to them this is bird habitat. They don't like bird habitat. They like it looking like a country club. We have tenants who rent from us who don't like that, and they're mad that we don't. A tenant of one of the buildings at a country club we just bought. We're converting all that land to battlefields and bird habitats. She's mad as heck. She's constantly complaining because she liked it when it was a country club. She doesn't care about birds. Any other questions?
Could I ask one other? I don't mean to be greedy here.
Yeah.
Do you do any controlled burns?
I don't do any control burns anymore in my particular role. I hire that out to folks, but we have a few sites that we plan on doing some controlled burns, and we have folks who help with that, hopefully, if we can get it done. Definitely, I want to do controlled burns. We'll see if we can do controlled burns. A lot of it has to do with what the surroundings are like, or who else might be co-managing that land with us.
Right.
And there's, again, everything's different. And
acquainted with Bobby Klontz, who's the land steward at Piney Grove. And part of the Nature Conservancy, and he's the chief burner. I don't know what the term is, but he does many prescribed burns. So I learned a little bit about. They're trying to restore longleaf down there. So I was just interested in whether you were doing something similar. And just one more.
Yeah.
Talking to the mic, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me? About the chestnuts.
Oh yeah, chestnuts.
I wasn't aware that a disease-resistant species had been developed.
I wouldn't
you're
go.
You're not offering these to be planted as sacrificial lambs.
Well, okay. Well, okay. So the question is about the hybrid chestnuts and how good they are. They're still. They have a long way to go. At least the American Chestnut Foundation does. The program hasn't been as successful as they'd hoped, as we hoped, as a member of the Chestnut Foundation, as somebody who, for 14 years, I worked on their science program. I know that there are some really great chestnuts out there that are hybrids that were actually developed by the Virginia Department of Forestry. Like 80 years ago, they started working on this program. And their trees are excellent, have good blight resistance, timber type trees. They look more, they have more Chinese traits in them, right? So the hybrids are between American chestnuts and Chinese chestnuts. And what the American Chestnut Foundation is trying to do is back cross those to Americans to try to get trees that still have resistance to blight, but look very American. Over 30 years of doing this work, their trees don't have very good resistance. They look like American chestnuts, but they don't have very good resistance. The Virginia Department of Forestry was working on a parallel program at the same time in collaboration with the Chestnut Foundation, but they weren't as rigorous about making their trees look as American. They just sort of let them grow and become forest trees, and then they'd get the seeds from them and let them grow. And they did this multiple rounds, but their trees look more Chinese-y. Now, they're not Chinese chestnuts. They're still American-type trees with great form, great timber trees. But if you look at them, they really look like a cross between American and Chinese, and they have great resistance, right? So it seems like the solution is accept some more Chinese traits in your tree and get good resistance and have a timber-type chestnut tree that produces all those nuts versus having a tree that's indistinguishable from an American. So now we're sort of revising our program a little bit to combine the TACF trees with the Virginia Department of Forestry trees, and we're doing all this work. But I kind of hand-selected trees from the Department of Forestry program. Just so you guys know, you can get access to some of these trees. If you go to the Virginia Department of Forestry tree nursery website to buy trees from their nursery, you will see that they sell pure American chestnut, pure Chinese chestnut, and hybrids. The hybrids are usually those good trees from the Virginia Department of Forestry program. If you get some of those, they have a better chance. I won't say they have a perfect chance, but they have a better chance of doing very well. So if we do forest plots with about 1,000 trees, I would expect half of them to become timber trees.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No?
I have a question for you.
Ask away.
So you saw readout 11 on the Egger track.
What's that?
You saw readout 11
Oh, yeah.
on the Egger track.
Yeah, yes.
So obviously, there are other surviving readouts from the battle or portions of the readouts. Obviously, they didn't have trees growing out of them at the times of the battles. They do now.
Yeah.
What is your position or thinking on, do you remove the trees or do you leave them? If you remove them, is it at least a good idea to thin the canopy? So if a hurricane or something comes through, they don't act like a parachute, fall over and rip out of the readout, tear the ground up.
In my opinion, the trees are helping stabilize that.
Yeah.
And if we took the trees out, I think it would erode faster. So I would say eventually if we were to thin other parts of that forest or take other parts of improved trails, I think there should be some signage that shows what that fort looked like. Again, if you can't make an exact replica, put in interpretive signs that show people what it looked like and maybe explain why we're leaving the trees on it to keep it stabilized. Because I think if we take those trees off, it erodes faster.
Is bamboo an invasive species?
Oh my God.
Because we have it on the trust is working on saving another about 20 acres of the Williamsburg battlefield. If they are successful in doing it, this parcel has some dense bamboo on it.
Right. Yeah, bamboo is very invasive. So bamboo is invasive because of that root system, right? And once it'll grow, it'll kind of like stay in place for a couple decades, and then all of a sudden it takes off, right? Once it takes off, man, you're in trouble because it's set. Now, the good thing about bamboo is it doesn't produce seeds, right? So unlike a lot of invasive, it's not there blowing seeds around, starting new colonies in other locations. It's usually wherever it is, it grows out. The bad news is it's really hard to control. We're working on it right now. So typically with those mature stands is you'll have to hire somebody with a forest mulcher you're going to have to hire somebody to do it for you. And they'll go through with a forest mulcher, they'll mulch it all down, cut it all down, and then as it comes back up, they spray it. Then it comes back up and they spray it. Usually you have to spray it and then hit it with a bush hog again. Then it comes back up, you spray it, hit it with a bush hog again. So it's very labor expensive, and it's pretty expensive. I mean, the forest mulcher, I mean, we just did like 5 acres, and it was like $8,000 just for the forest mulcher. And now we're going through those cycles of spraying and bush hogging and spraying and bush hogging. And we still have like another 8 acres to go on this property of bamboo. It is really, really tough. I can't wait to transfer this to the park.
Any other questions for Tom?
Is that just a quick question?
Yep.
Kind of personal. The bamboo you're talking about, are you talking the ones that get, 20 feet tall
Yeah.
or whatever?
Yeah.
Or they're, how about the short variety that I got in my front yard?
So they're the short ones that stay short, right? They're not just the big ones that you just planted. Yeah. So those are I believe they're called the golden bamboo versus the running bamboo. The bad ones are the running bamboo. The golden bamboo are actually fine. They're not native, but they don't become invasive. So you're okay.
Well, they are in my front yard.
Oh, are they taking over? Are they moving? So do you have heavenly bamboo? Is it called heavenly bamboo? Does it look bamboo-ish, but it's actually a bush?
Yeah, well, just a bunch of individual plants packed together. I'll talk to
I would cut them down. Well, I would. Yeah. Why don't we talk later? Give me your email and I'll send you some instructions how to get rid of it. You'll have to do a combination of cutting and spraying it. You'll have to spray it, but I'll tell you the right stuff, and then you have to have all your safety equipment, your gloves. All right. Anything else? Are we out of time?
Anything else you want to, we got maybe like 10 minutes. Anything else you'd like to?
Not really.
Yeah.
We got a little bit more time.
Well, let's say I'm done with the crux of my talk. It's just,
Just as you keep mentioning insecticides, is there insecticides that you would recommend?
Yes.
Or is there some insecticide or do you automatically think that all insecticides are bad? You shouldn't use them. There's got to be some kind of natural process to take care of what you want to do.
so the question is about herbicides, right? I try not to use insecticides ever, not even around my home. I love pollinators way too much, including bees, even wasps. Do you know most of the wasps around your home are not the stinging kind? Even some of those big, mean-looking hornets, most of them don't sting. They're not interested in you. They would if you grabbed it or if you stepped on it, but they're usually just busy doing their own thing. A lot of times I'll put a jar over the nest and catch it and go throw it in the woods. I don't want them. And sometimes I just leave them. But the only real problems are bald-faced hornets and what are the ground wispy ones? The yellow jackets. Those ones are pretty aggressive. Those ones will go and sting you for no reason. And bees, of course, honeybees, they don't care about you, but if you step on them or accidentally grab them, they might sting you instinctively. Or if they're living in some logs and you start chopping at those logs because you want to put in a fence, then they might sting you. Not that I'm speaking from experience. But herbicides is the question. What herbicides would I use? Yes, I use herbicides. And we need to use herbicides so that we can manage the invasive species. Most invasive species can't be managed without herbicides. But why do we even care about managing invasive species in the first place? Well, first of all, I want to restore native habitat. Notice I went right into my next section of my presentation because you asked. And because we want to conserve wildlife. So what? Invasive species are green, right? You see an ecosystem, it's all green stuff. Why do we have to kill one plant so that we could have another plant? Well, invasive species are more destructive to the environment. They will take over. They'll do things like this and kill our trees. More importantly, a lot of invasive species, most of them, the reason why we call them invasive, and not all non-natives are invasive. The invasives are a non-native plant that doesn't behave. It takes over. It outcompetes the native plants. It reduces native plant biodiversity. When you have a place that's overrun with invasives, you don't have the native plants that ought to be there, right? When you have that, you end up with things like this monoculture of stiltgrass. Now, this monoculture of stiltgrass isn't just changing the composition of the environment. Underneath the forest, it's usually pretty open. But you're certainly not getting the spring ephemerals that are crucial to the spring pollinators that come out in April and May. When you don't have spring ephemerals, they suffer. But what's worse is stiltgrass has been shown it's really bad for amphibians, believe it or not. That's the group, that's what's getting hurt the most by this, because the predators that mostly wolf spiders, believe it or not, that eat salamanders, they take advantage of that. The salamanders can't get away as easily. They're stuck in that stuff, and the wolf spiders are killing them at such a higher rate that it's alarming. So we don't want all that stuff. But more importantly is this loss of native plant biodiversity. Those edges and those riparian areas where we have all the invasives, you know those areas that I said are most important to target? Those are also the places where we have more plant biodiversity than anywhere else. When we have those places are taken over by invasive species, we lose the important native plants that the other wildlife depends on. And who depends mostly on native plants? Insects. Insects are so host-specific that 90% of them, especially pollinators, require a very specific host. Does anybody know what that is? Monarch. Yes! Oh, awesome. I love you guys. That's a monarch butterfly. Now, if you see the monarch butterflies in their wing form, or tiger swallowtails, or any of them, they'll visit any flower out there, right? They'll go to anything. It's when they're in their larval stage. The parents will lay eggs on the milkweed because that's the only thing the larvae can eat. So if you don't have milkweed, you won't have monarch butterflies. And guess where the milkweed's growing? In those fields that we were talking about. We're losing all those fields. That's why monarch butterflies are threatened, because there's not enough habitat for them. Why can't they live on those invasive grasses and weeds and all that stuff in those fields? Because they need milkweed. And when you lose your plant biodiversity, you lose your insect biodiversity, and you lose a lot of the things that the birds and amphibians and reptiles eat. Doesn't mean you can't see lots of birds out there, and probably more insects than you want, and skunks and raccoons and all those other things. There's still a lot of stuff out there. It's just out of balance, right? When you think about that connected web of nature, at the base of that web is the plants. And when those are all messed up, the whole thing's messed up. It's not in balance anymore. So, invasives disrupt the ecosystem. All of else is out of balance. I just said that. I'm just going to say it again. There it is. I just said that a second ago. When we cooperate, we can do the work that we need to. I'm going to move on and get to the part about management strategies and herbicides. First of all, we have to identify our natives and our non-natives. So if we can have a volunteer day this winter and go out there, we'll start looking at these things. And we'll look at some of the things that are really important, right? We have kind of a funny thing. When we walked by, we looked at those two bushes that looked identical, right? One of them was a native American holly. And sitting right next to it was invasive leatherleaf mahonia. They look similar until you take a closer look. Once you guys can identify the invasives, you know what to tackle. Then you can develop your management plan. Timing and method are crucial. We have to use herbicides, but if you want to minimize herbicides, and in particular if you want to minimize the impact to the environment, knowing about timing and method are a crucial part of this. So here's a few simple things that I would like to teach you guys if we can go out and do some stuff. But if you can't make any of our volunteer events, I will simply direct you to the Blue Ridge Prism website, and they have all those resources. They have taped webinars, they have fact sheets, they have all the stuff that I'm presenting. Even these pictures come from their website. You can get all the information you need to know. You can also shoot me an email. I will help any of you with any of your problems. It doesn't have to be on trust property, because this is what I care about. We're going to teach you guys how to do cut stump this winter. We probably won't do a lot of hack and squirt, but if we have an opportunity, I'll show you how to do that. It's a little fickle. It's not my favorite. I like cut stump. And then one of my favorite things is basil bark. Basil bark application is great because you don't have to cut it down, you don't have to chop it, you don't have to do anything. You just go when it's cool out and you take your wand with this oil herbicide and you just brush it on the stem. And you know how much autumn olive and bittersweet and privet you can kill in the wintertime when you go and just brush this on the stems and they don't wake up the next spring? It doesn't take much, and it doesn't get out in the environment. You put it on the stem and it soaks right into that tree. It only kills that tree, and then the tree's gone. Well, until the next one comes up from the seed bank. And then you have to come back and do it again and again and again. Foliar spraying is something we do. We only use certain products for foliar spraying, but it can be very effective. That's what's happening there. You get the backpack on, you go out there and you spray stuff. It's important to use the safe stuff, the right time, the right dose, right? You don't just say, hey, if 1% does it, let's make it 5%, right? Mechanical methods. There's a lot of ways we can hand pull things. I showed you that picture of the stilt grass. We go out there, we trim it. Stop the seed production. We don't have to use herbicide on it. Sometimes you do, depends on topographical constraints and so forth. But wait, aren't herbicides bad? Yes, herbicides might be bad. So let's put this on the table right now. Some herbicides can be dangerous for you or the environment. Don't just go to the store and buy anything off the shelf. You have to know what the right stuff is. Now, if you're using the right products at the right time, the right method, it can actually be really safe. And here's the thing. We can't manage most of the invasive species out there without using some amount of herbicide. Who's heard of glyphosate?
Oh my God.
What is it in?
Oh God, it's in Roundup.
It's in Roundup. Is it terrible?
I can't even talk about it. No, it depends. Honestly, from a chemical engineering standpoint, it depends what solution you're.
Exactly, yes,
So,
right.
If it's not in Roundup,
Yes.
then you get your own.
Oh, see, you're smart. What are you, a chemical engineer?
No.
Oh,
No, I'm not. I'm just a numbers lady.
oh. So you said it. Roundup, in general, we don't ever use it. We don't use Roundup, not because of the glyphosate, because of the other stuff that they put in it. Now, if you have Roundup at home, don't feel indicted. If you use the Roundup the right way at the right time, you're okay. But in the future, what I would recommend is there are other versions of glyphosate products that are actually aquatic safe. Aquaneat, yep, Shorefine. There's a few of them. There's a few of them out there, and we could give you some suggestions on ones. So if you get a straight glyphosate that doesn't have all the stuff added to it, and then you mix it yourself and you add your own surfactant, which I prefer to use something called Sidekick, C-I-D-E, like herbicide, Sidekick 2, because that's aquatic safe. And when I mix up solutions, I don't want it to get into a stream and kill the amphibians. So I only make aquatic safe solutions. I only make it as strong as it needs to be for the circumstances. If I'm doing a foliar spray, I make a weak solution that is safe. The glyphosate itself breaks down in the soil within a few hours, 24 hours or whatever, right? So if you're spraying that on something, it doesn't kill insects, but it's not good for honeybees. Do you know why? Glyphosate impedes the ability of the honeybee to make honey. So our rule of thumb is you never spray any herbicides on any plant that's in bloom. If it's in bloom, you missed your window, or wait till the flowers are gone, or use something like cut stump, right? We don't spray flowers, but we do spray plants that aren't in bloom with a 2 to 3% solution of glyphosate with our own surfactants added to it, if that's what it's going to take to kill it and restore the native plant community and restore harmony in that ecosystem, where you're then going to start to see the pollinators come back. Because I guarantee you, if all that's in your field is stilt grass, there are no pollinators, because there's nothing for them to forage on. So let's kill the stilt grass and restore the things that the insects need, right? So I will use herbicides, but I caution you to get the right product and use it the right way. Otherwise, it could be dangerous. Is there anything else there? Careful. Just what I said. We can go over all this. When I do trainings, I provide handouts. And remember, our goal is to conserve wildlife. And we don't want to give you cancer in the process. So we'll do this the right way. And in the end, we'll have a healthier habitat and a healthier ecosystem. And yes, using herbicides when we have to. But we'll be judicious about it. We use a targeted approach. We use foliar spray on that or hand pull it. Cut stump on those vines and small things. Hand pull. If you can hand pull it, hand pull it. If you got a big crew. When we did that wetland work, I showed you a slide a little bit ago, we didn't use any herbicide. We spent the day and we cleared that wetland of all the low-growing honeysuckle and stiltgrass, did it all by hand. It was a great day. We got so much done. Look at that. She's so happy about that garlic mustard. She's going to go home and make pesto. These are the woods behind my house. When we moved here, it was just covered with invasives. Every tree had vines crawling up of it. We spent, well, we've been managing, it's been more than 2 years now. It's been about 4 years. But I've been going out there whenever I get free time. I get an hour or hour and a half, half hour, take a break. I can't sit by my computer anymore. I'll go out there. I have my equipment ready to go, so I might grab my basil bark if it's winter, or my foliar spray, or I go out and hand pull it. I spend so much time hand pulling this stuff. I work on it, and I work on it, and I stay on top of it, and each year I expand the range that I'm working on, and over time, where it was all invasives, I'm now seeing all these native plants. I'm seeing wild yams. I'm seeing licorice bedstraw and wintergreen. These things are coming into a place that was covered with stiltgrass. And all my trees, there's not a vine on any of those trees back there. It's about maybe 8 acres of woods, right? So it's not that hard, and I still have so much to do. But persistence is the key to success. That's my mantra. It's been my mantra since my eye doctor told me that when I wanted to go back to college late in life, but was too busy, and I was working, and he told me persistence is the key to success. And the next fall, I was enrolled in school, and now I'm an ecologist. Same is true for these woods. Same is true for our battlefields. And same is true for your yards. That's it. Now I'm done.
Tom, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We want to present you with a gift,
Oh.
so don't hurry off.
I thought you were pushing me out.
No, not at all. I think we could all continue listening to you for a while longer. And I'm sure
that's not
he'll
true.
be happy to have you talk with him afterwards if you have some further questions. But we'll have to have you back for a part 2 someday.
Part 2 is going to be in the field.
Yeah, okay, great. Let's talk dates. Well, as a thank you for giving up your time to come to us today, I want to present you with this book, Hidden History of Civil War Williamsburg, by our local author and historian, Carson Hudson Jr. So he has
Thank you
signed it
so
for
much.
you.
Oh, my
I
goodness.
hope you enjoy reading that whenever you have spare time.
I will, all that spare time.
This is some of those untold stories of
Wow.
Civil War Williamsburg people don't know about. I think you will find it enjoyable.
I can't wait to read it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
I really
much.
appreciated it.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
all of you.